This is Wylock number 34. So review of the Pythagorean theorem. Here's the Pythagorean theorem, and we just have to substitute the values a and b into the equation. We have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, if we input the values, we get 8 squared plus 15 squared is equal to c squared. Now, 8 squared is 64, and 15 squared is 225, equals c squared. Now, if we add these two numbers together, we get 289, and we have to square root both sides, and we get square root of 289. Then, if you find out what square root of 289 is, well, that's just 17. So c is equal to 17. Moving on. Simplifying complex fractions. This is just a review. We have 3x over 2 over negative 6x cubed. Now, when you're dividing a number by a number, what you're doing is you're basically, you can also write it as multiplying its reciprocal. So for example, if I was to say 2 divided by 6, I could also say 2 times 1 over 6. That 1 over 6 is the reciprocal of 6, and I could just multiply that to 2 to get the same result as if I were to divide 2 by 6. In this case, we have 3x over 2 and negative 6x cubed. If we say 3x over 2 times 1 over negative 6x cubed, that would be the same thing as if I were to just divide it. Now, if I do this and I simplify by cross multiplying, like this, and we cross x and we get x squared, all we have left is 1 over 4x squared. Now don't forget there's a negative in front, so we also have to include that negative. Now we have negative 1 over 4x squared is our answer. Moving on, add and subtract rational expressions. So in this case, 5 over 3x plus 7 over 3x. Since they have both same common denominator, you can just add the numerators together and you get 12 over 3x. Now you can simplify that into 4 over x, and that would be your answer. Now, finding the least common denominator of the rational expressions. You have 4r squared and you have 10r squared, as you're trying to find the least common denominator. Now, a least common denominator is the lowest common multiple of the denominators of a set of fractions. So in this case, what would the lowest common denominator be for this problem? And to do that, we just gotta find a common multiple. If we were to multiply this 4r squared by 10, and if we were to multiply 10 by 4, they would both share 40r squared. In this case, that would mean that our LCD would be 40r squared. Now, the reason why I multiplied this by 10 is because that's the factor that the other denominator is multiplied by. The reason I multiplied by 4 is because that's the factor that's multiplied for the first denominator. These are the lowest common denominators, so that's why I multiplied them by their respective factors, and that's why the LCD would be 40r squared. If I were to actually solve this, 1 over 4r squared, let's say I'm adding them, so r plus 3 over 10r squared. Then for this instance, for them to have a common denominator, I would multiply 4 on both sides. Since there's 4 is the multiple of this denominator, and to compensate for this, there's a 10 over here, so I'll multiply this by 10. As that's the lowest multiple that is being multiplied in this denominator. So that would give me 10 over 40r squared plus 4r plus 3 and 40r squared. Now, because these have the same common denominator, you can add those two numerators, 4r plus 12, 40r squared. Now if you add these two together, you get 22 plus 4r over 40r squared. And you can simplify by 2. So 11 plus 2r, and you get 20r squared in the denominator. And that would be your answer. Moving on, 3 over c minus 2, c plus 8 over 2c plus 7. In this case, our lowest common denominator, just multiply by whatever's under the denominator here. So in this instance, 2c plus 7, well, I want them to share the same denominator, so I'll multiply 2c plus 7 over here. Now, because I can't just multiply one thing on one side, I have to do 2c plus 7 on the numerator as well. And the reason for that is I can't just multiply 1 over 2c plus 7 into the equation. I have to multiply it by a reasonable number. If I were to multiply it by 1, which if I were to do 3c minus 2 times 1, and I translated 1 into 2c plus 7 over 2c plus 7, in this instance, since 2c plus 7, if that's in the numerator and that's in the denominator, then it would just be 1. So I could just do this, bring that over here, and I could multiply on top and bottom. If I were to do that, I would get 2c plus 7 times c minus 2 as the denominator over here. And if for this one, I would multiply c minus 2 top and bottom, and I would get 2c plus 7 c minus 2. For this problem, our LCD would be equal to 2c plus 7 times c minus 2, whatever that will be. And that's Y log number 34.